Welcome everybody in this new video. My name is Brian Feldman and I'm a Microsoft Azure and Security MVP. Many of you asked me, can you create a video about how to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop and also explain a bit of the core concepts around Azure Virtual Desktop. Before we continue, I saw that there was more than 90% of you guys not subscribed to the channel. I would recommend to subscribe in order to stay informed of my latest videos. So to start off, Azure Virtual Desktop is a modern desktop virtualization solution. So for example, you have a legacy line of business application that you would facilitate to users. Then the Azure Virtual Desktop is a new modern solution for this. Like facilitate 1.1 sessions, multiple sessions, create graphical environments for people who have to do graphical work. In short, Azure Virtual Desktop delivers secure, flexible and scalable Windows desktops and applications from the Microsoft Azure cloud. And you can access it at any time from any device. And also for the people who are curious about the licensing model, you must provide an eligible license for each user. So for example, we have the Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session hosts. So in that case, the users that are going to access Azure Virtual Desktop must have one of those licenses as mentioned above. So basically, in most cases, you already have those licenses. So instead, with other third parties, you have to buy licenses separately. So this is a huge cost benefit for most organizations. So from my experience, I've migrated a lot of customers to the Azure cloud. This was an enabler to do that because they don't have to buy it separately. It's a huge cost slash in your monthly bill. For this demo, we will deploy the Windows 11 Enterprise multi-session, but if you're going to use another operating system, check the requirements in the Microsoft documentation. So for this scenario, we are going to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop using Bicep. So Bicep is just the way of declaring our infrastructure using code, instead just clicking through the portal and all that hassle that comes with it. So what we are going to do today is deploy Azure Virtual Desktop using Bicep. It will integrate with Entra ID. If you use Intune, it will be also part of Intune. It will be part of a virtual network, like it belongs with all those VMs to one network. Based on that, we can define things like an Azure firewall in order to get control of the inbound and outbound traffic. And if needed, you can also deploy FS Logic to store user profiles. So when the user is going to sign in, it will just get the user profile, it will attach it while starting the session, and the user can just get their stuff back. So basically the VMs will be part of Entra ID, it will be Entra ID joined, and also it will be registered in Intune, so we can also do things like configuration on it. Then we have Azure Virtual Desktop, so this will be Microsoft managed. However, we need to facilitate the resources like the host pool, as you can see, the workspace which the user needs to subscribe to, and also the application groups which describe, okay, you as a user can access the following application. So this could be a full desktop, like a full Windows experience. However, this could also be a remote app, like I'm just defining Word as a remote application to the user. And then, as mentioned before, Microsoft is managing the gateway, the broker, diagnostics, and the web access. Then we got the VNet. So on which VNet are we going to host all the session hosts? And as you can see, we can define, okay, this has to be Windows 11 multi-session hosts. And as mentioned before, the multi-session is just multiple users on a host sharing the same resources, or one user to one host, which is just a personal desktop. So this could be for people who have to do graphical things on a desktop. So they have to configure their own settings on the graphic card based on their requirements for the application. And based on the VNet, we can just route inbound and outbound traffic. And last but not least, you can also deploy Azure Files, which you will use to store the FS Logic profile containers. So FS Logic is just a separate piece of software that you are running on your Azure Virtual Desktop session hosts in order to just attach these user profiles. So for the clarity of this demo, we are going to deploy the AVD control plane, like the Azure Virtual Desktop host pool, the Azure Virtual Desktop workspace, the application group. Microsoft will manage the gateway, broker, diagnostics, and the web access. We don't have to do anything with certificates anymore. After that, we are going to deploy a VNet. So we are going to create a virtual network where the session host will land. Then the session hosts will be created. I will use the Marketplace image for that. However, you can build your own images and then just build session hosts based on that. For this deployment, we are going to use session host config. So this basically means that we are going to define our config in the session host config. And based on that, we can just recycle all session hosts. So for example, if we have a new image version, we want to recycle session host 1 with the new image, we can just do that based on our needs. So, okay, I want to replace the session host 1 upcoming Friday in the evening, then that's a good candidate to use session host config, because I don't want to do this manually anymore, because we are ITers and are lazy. So if we would zoom in, then we see the AVD control plane, the application group, the workspace, the session hosts. We also have to do some role assignments. So this is basically needed for the session host config in order to place new VMs based on the new image. The managed identity is attached to the host pool in order to do that. And also the key vault is used to read the admin secrets. For example, if you would like to AD integrate this, like you are going to deploy the session host to your local AD, then that's also possible with the session host config. And it is important to also save those secrets in the key vault in order to join them to the domain. But for this demo, we are going to integrate them with Entra ID, so there's no local AD involved in this. However, we also need to define the local admin credentials for the session hosts, so that's why there's also a key vault involved in this. Without any further ado, let's go to VS Code and deploy our Azure Virtual Desktop environment. So as mentioned before, we can deploy Azure Virtual Desktop using ClickOps. However, I prefer to use infrastructure as code, and then based on the code, I can deploy it to the customer. So to make things a little bit easier, I've created a GitHub repo where I store my Azure Bicep templates that I've been using for my blogs and videos. You can clone it as well, but also fork it, contribute to it, and don't forget to start a repo because I would like that. However, what we can do is just hit the git clone, github.com/brianfeldman/Azure-Bicep and then hit the enter button, and then it will clone into the folder Azure-Bicep. So when navigating through the folder, we can go to the compute-containers folder, and from there you will find the Azure Virtual Desktop folder. So I will also navigate to the folder using my terminal, and then the 4 compute containers, and then we need to go to Azure Virtual Desktop. Yeah, that's okay. From there I will clean the screen. And now we can check what's in the folder. We can see it's a session host config. And from there we can see there's a main.bicep file. Let's open that. So what I basically did is that I've created an Azure Bicep file in which where I declare a couple of input parameters. For example, you can decide which location am I going to use to deploy these resources in Azure. We also have to pass a local admin password secret name. As mentioned before, this will be stored in the key vault. This is needed for the session host config in order to place new VMs based on our config. And for security purposes, I don't want this password to be hard-coded. And also, I don't want to spill this in the deployment history of my Azure deployment. So that's why the parameter is secure. You have to fill this out when you are going to deploy this Bicep template. Then we have a couple of tags, which will be associated with our resources. Then we are going to deploy a resource group, which will hold all the AVD resources. And when the resource group has been created, we are going to deploy the AVD module. So let's open up the AVD module to see what's inside there. We can see that we are building up our variables. For example, the host pool name, the workspace name, application group, the key vault as well, the VNet, and also the user-assigned managed identity for the session host config. So in the first step, we are going to deploy a key vault, which will store our secrets. It will be based on the location that we were passing using the input parameter. Also for the tenant ID, I don't want the hardcode values in my Bicep template. It makes my Bicep templates dynamic for more customers. Otherwise, I have to replace all those values every time I deploy for a different customer. Then we will deploy some key vault secrets. So in this case, these will be used for the local admin credentials. After that, we are going to deploy a VNet. It will use an address prefix with a /23, which means 512 addresses available for all our subnets. And then for our AVD subnet, we will use a /24 prefix, which means 256 addresses, which can be consumed for our AVD session hosts. After that, we are going to deploy a user-assigned managed identity. This will be used for the session host config. Then we are going to deploy the host pool, and also based on the properties, because we are going to serve an Azure Virtual Desktop pool for multiple users on one host. So we are sharing the resources. The host pool type will be pooled. After that, we have to do some role assignments. Then we are going to deploy the session host configuration. This Bicep resource is a child of the parent Bicep resource host pool because it's part of the host pool. So I define that the disk will be a premium LRS disk. It will be joined to my Entra ID. And yes, the value in the API is still Azure Active Directory. Then for the Marketplace info, which just describes that I'm going to consume an image from the Microsoft gallery, it will be a Windows 11 25H2 AVD M365 image. I will get a Windows 11 multi-session host 25H2 image. And also in that image, the Microsoft 365 applications have already been installed. And also for the network info, we are going to join it in the subnet. Since we only have one subnet and the first subnet is AVD, it will be 0. The secure boot will be enabled. Without going too deep on that, it will ensure that there will be an attestation when the VM is getting booted in the Azure data center. We also have to deploy session host management, which will also be a child resource of the host pool. It will just ensure that when we are going to deploy session hosts, it will define, okay, when there is a filled session host, do I want to keep it or delete it? So in this case, I want to keep it. And also when doing the session host update, I would like to remove 1 PM max. The logoff delay will be 2 minutes and users will get a logoff message by saying you will be signed out. So you can just customize this based on your needs. So for example, you could define you will be signed out in 5 minutes. Please save your work. Then we will deploy the application group. It will be linked to the host pool ID because it is also part of the host pool because you have to link the application group. And then last but not least, for all our resources, we have to deploy the workspace. So this means that the user can subscribe to the AVD workspace. It can be a little bit hard if this is new for you. However, I try to explain everything that is part of this Bicep deployment so that you know this is the impact when running this Bicep template. Make sure that you are connected to your AZ account. So in the first place, you have to verify that you have been signed in with the correct user. You can do this using get AZ context. And as you can see, I'm signed in. And yes, for the purpose of this demo, I've hidden some sensitive information. So now we know we are signed in our Azure subscription. We can just deploy our resources to that subscription. For that, I will use the new AZ subscription deployment. The name of our deployment will be AVD session host config deploy cloud tips. And then the template file, which I will be referencing, will be the main.bicep file, because that's the bicep file that is living in the session host config folder. And then for the location, it will be West Europe. So let's hit the enter button. And after that, we will be prompted to enter our password for the local administrator. So I filled out my local administrator password secret name. Let's hit the enter button and grab a coffee. After my coffee refill, we can see that the resource group has been deployed. All the resources, as mentioned before, are deployed within the resource group. When checking the host pool, we can see there's a total of 1 machine in this host pool. And based off the total machines, which is currently 1, there's also a possibility to connect to 1. So this means our session host is healthy. For example, we could have 2 total machines where 1 is able to connect to and the other one cannot be connected to. This could be due to the fact you have some issues with your session host. For example, the domain join failed or the AVD agent is not working properly, or for example, the registration did not complete. However, for this demo, we have 1 machine and we are able to connect to it, as we can see by the green check mark. From the session host option in the menu, you can check all the session hosts that are associated with this host pool. We can see that our machine is running and is available from the health state. If we need to, we can manually add more session hosts. However, because this host pool is created using session host config, we can dynamically scale up and scale down session hosts based on our user load. For example, in the midnight, we don't have any session host in the host pool. However, from 6 AM in the morning, we spin up the first VM. But when the session host is filled with 15 users, the dynamic scaling plan automatically adds another one. For now, let's go to the application groups. We can see the application group. We can click on that. From the application group, we can see that we have 1 application. When checking the application, we can see the session desktop. This means that we are giving the user that is going to connect to AVD the full desktop experience. However, if you would like to facilitate a remote application, for example, only Word as an application, then that's also possible, but you have to configure that. So from the assignment step, we can decide we are going to give the following user access to the AVD environment. Best practice for this is to use groups, enter ID groups, so you can add a user to a group, and based on that membership, you get access to the AVD. This will improve your onboarding and offboarding process. Otherwise, if you add users manually and you offboard them, you have to clear this assignment. And from my experience, a lot of people forget that. However, for this demo, I will add myself to the application group so I can sign in. I will select my user and hit select. Now we can see that I've been added successfully. Now we need a way to connect to the AVD environment. We can do this using an HTML5 browser. However, I as a user prefer to use a desktop application because that gives me the best experience. Also, if you're working with session hosts that run a graphics card, it's also recommended to use the desktop app. So I've installed the Windows application on my Mac. I'm signed in with my user in my Cloud Tips tenant. We see the AVD environment that we can connect to. So let's do that. It's connecting to the session desktop. And this is the moment we see the full Windows desktop experience. From the start menu, we can see the Office applications as part of the gallery image. We can also verify this within the control panel, programs and features. We can also see that FS Logic has been installed on the host. However, we didn't configure FS Logic for AVD. If you're interested in that part, please let me know in the comments and I will create a video dedicated on that. We can also see all the programs that are associated with AVD. So those are needed to be able to connect to a healthy AVD session host. And so for this last part, of this video, it is good to understand what's happening in the background. The user has been signed in using the Windows application. Within the session host option, within the host pool, we can see the VM, as mentioned before, it is healthy, but we can also see the total sessions. So in this case, we can see there's one person connected to the AVD session host desktop. If you would click on the virtual machine name, we can see more about the health check status, but we can also navigate to the users and we can see the user principal name of the user that has been signed in to the AVD environment. This was a long video. I hope you guys appreciate it. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe below. If you have any suggestions or feedback for new videos, please leave it in the comments. If you would like to know more about dynamic scaling plans, remote applications in AVD, or something else within AVD, please let me know in the comments. And last but not least, I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.